I'm the guy that discovered that if you project a diffracted laser on any surface and you smoke DMT, you will see some kind of a what seems to be self-executing code running in the surface. One of the components is that the fact that it's completely repeatable. After a decade, you kind of know what's in the neighborhood. Even if it's infinite, you kind of know the signature of the thing. And that was not on the map. That was completely different. That was like, I've never seen this before. And that was basically a being appeared in front of me, and he didn't look like a person. He looked more like a kind of like a hybrid between a frog and a lizard thingy. But he was as real as you are, standing next to me. I was frozen, not from fear. I was just, that's it. Nothing will ever be the same again.
Back when I was a tech, people would call me with these weird issues, and it would always drive me absolutely nuts trying to figure out like the root cause. Like, I'm so obsessed about finding like what is like the root of it all. And I guess that translates to the podcast a little bit too, but
it actually goes directly to some elements that seem to be operating at the core of what reality is doing. So, air is part of, like, the ultimate glitch is reality itself. Mm-hmm. So you actually can't, I'm sure you're familiar, some of the stuff well, it's like if you look at Wolfram's work, which is really like a very advanced recapitulation of Feynman and other scientists from that time, and really the irreducibility of computation is basically kind of like it's embedded in what reality is. You can't have it's impossible to write code without having bugs in it. It's impossible to run a process without something going wrong. In principle, it's impossible. That's why I meant by, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but that's what I meant by, don't you know that it works that way by now? It also has this, it has a pattern though. So like, I'm an editor, like one of the stuff that I do that less now, but I edited for TV shows and stuff like that. And when you get to a certain point of the edit, it doesn't happen in the beginning, or there's like a bunch of problems in the beginning. It's a separate kind of thing. But then when you get to the end, there's always like, you already know, oh, now there's some kind of something's gonna not work right now. Like, I know it. Mm-hmm. And it always happens almost exactly this. Like, you're almost there, and then it goes down, and you're like, And then I learned to just expect that. That's just part of what's happening, and it has always this element. And it doesn't matter what you do. Like, anything has to do with anything technical. You try to achieve something. It's some kind of a process. So there's always going to have this moment where things just, for no reason, they just break down. And you have to learn to go with it too.
I recently read Rick Rubin's book, A Creative Act, and phenomenal book, by the way. And that book really changed my whole perspective on what you just were talking about, because it's just like, it's inevitable that things will go wrong, and it's how you react to it. And like you said, almost expect it to happen and just kind of go with the flow. And if something happens that, it causes a catastrophe or something, it just wasn't meant to be. And you're meant to go on the other path. It's like fate, more or less.
In fact, if nothing goes wrong for a while, I'm actually becoming kind of worried.
Yeah.
Because that means that means something big is coming.
Yeah, a tsunami's coming. Yeah, exactly, 100%. Yeah. So Danny, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. It actually is a little bit of a synchronicity how we got connected through Melvin Vobson. Do you actually know how that transpired by chance?
With you and Melvin?
Yeah. Well, how I was interviewing Melvin, or Josh and I were interviewing Melvin, and so let me tell you a quick story, if that's okay. I'll start off by kind of saying a little bit about this podcast and what we're trying to do. But so we're talking to Melvin, and I was familiar with your work, but it was a couple of degrees of separation. Like, I love Danny Jones's podcast, and at night I tend to put stuff on quantum mechanics and simulation theory and things like that on the TV. It helps me fall asleep. And I must have been listening to one of your episodes not knowing who you were, and we were talking to Melvin, and somehow the conversation led to simulation theory. Well, not somehow. Obviously, that was the main point of the conversation, but there was little micro transactions throughout the conversation that made me think of you. And I didn't even know your name. I think I blurted out, Josh, something like, isn't there a guy that's giving, at the time I said LSD to people, that making them look at a laser with a code? And Josh, everyone was laughing at me. And he's like, you're talking about Danny Goler and the DMT Laser Experiment. And I'm like, that's the guy. And turns out that Melvin knew who you were and connected us. So it's funny how that all worked out.
Yeah, Melvin is a good friend.
Yeah, he's a good guy. And even to take it just a little step further, we wanted to talk to Melvin about his simulation theory, specifically like some of that paper he recently put out around gravity. And yeah, he got back to us saying, I'd love to talk to you guys, but also I think I saw a ghost. And and then started sending us some photos. And he's great. He came into the podcast with a slideshow presentation. It was amazing.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was really fascinating.
I mean, he is a scientist.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
You know, people. It is true to say that, you know, scientists are people, but I always forget that a PhD in physics, or sometimes I forget that it takes some doing to get there. So
yes,
the arrangement of information is something they swim in every day in levels that most people don't understand.
Yes.
Yeah. And something interesting about ghosts, actually, because ghosts are actually a crucial indicator of something. I'm sure you're familiar because everybody are always sharing this, and this is all news at this point, but people love sharing it because it resurfaces every once in a while. The work, the whole Adinkras thing, error correcting codes, Sylvester James, Professor Sylvester James, right, with the most dope afro in history, and he discovered error correcting codes at the core of these structures called Adinkras, which are basically represent a visual representation of advanced equations of string theory. And what's interesting is that, I don't know if you ever saw an interview with him that is more lengthy than just the clips that people share, like 30 seconds of him saying it. But he's very adamant about this does not mean we live in a simulation. According to him, we're not living in a simulation. It does not mean that, because that's his number one reason that he mentions. If we would be in a simulation, ghosts would be possible.
He says the computers will take over.
Yeah. It basically says that we're all just simulations. If you accept that, then you have to also accept the existence of ghost.
Existence of?
Ghost. Edgar Allan Poe, ghost.
Oh, okay.
Ghost. Right?
Why, Jim?
Because if we are simulations, there's some kind of substructure that we don't have access to that runs us as an app. So when we die, what does that mean? It means that particular app was ended, that the app stopped running. But if that underlying superstructure still exists, and if there's no damage to the codeware, whoever is running this superstructure can re-enable a app, let's say Jim Gates 500 years from now. So Jim Gates comes back as a ghost. It's built into the idea that the universe is a simulation. This doesn't sound like the universe I exist in.
Ghost is some kind of a very interesting indicator that has a technical implication inside of an actual simulation, because it will be there's a technical explanation to it why ghosts specifically and nothing else, because they're kind of like in between the informational structures. So I just thought it was funny that the first thing that Melvin told us, well, I think I saw a ghost, because it definitely goes to the core of that argument, actually.
Yeah, his story is really interesting too. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, and he was a little bit reluctant to talk about his infodynamics stuff because I guess he's having some pushback with his university. But we ended up having a great conversation about it. It was great. I'm excited for that episode to come out. I'm actually editing it now. So
awesome.
Yeah. So Danny, I guess I think most of our listeners will probably know who you are, but for those that don't, I don't want to rehash the whole story, because you can find that on other podcasts. But could you give just maybe a 2-minute, 3-minute just kind of synopsis of who you are and the DMT Laser Experiment?
Yeah, I think I can do it I can do it a lot faster than that. I'm the guy that discovered that if you project a diffracted laser on any surface and you smoke DMT, you will see some kind of what seems to be self-executing code running in the surface. And the details of why it stands out more than a psychedelic observation is really what the conversation about and why it's so unique and outstanding. One of the components is that the fact that it's completely repeatable. It is true that some people are having a little bit of a hard time to see it in the beginning, but the second people see it, they can't unsee it. It's just like looking at at an object. It does. There's other maybe a little bit more obscure qualities to it that we can talk about. But for example, it does not evolve. This is a point that Chase Hughes made about the fact that when you're in a substance, if you're hallucinating, the hallucination will follow an arc. That arc would evolve with the amount of the substance in your bloodstream and your brain, right? There's a certain as it metabolizes, there's a change in it. The code doesn't have that. It just kind of appears, disappears, depending on how much molecule you have, but it just becomes more and more faint version of itself, and then it just disappears from your view. You smoke a little bit more, it appears right back on, exactly how it is, but it does not have any kind of form of evolution. And there's other qualities. So that's the summation. I'm just, for all intents and purposes, I'm just some guy. I mean, there are other components about me personally that I was always kind of like interested in the deep questions about the world, but in a way that maybe is a little bit more obsessive than most people that are not. That's not their job. Like scientists, yes, that's their job, but for me, that component of exploring what is at the edges of existence and what's possible was always in the forefront of my mind, no matter what I did in my life. And I guess eventually kind of led me to ask the question a little bit more seriously, which is, wait, is it real? Like real? Is it actually real? And then the finding the answer to that question led me eventually to the laser and where we are now.
Yeah. Yeah, that what you just said speaks very deeply to me too, because I feel the exact same way. I walk through life and no matter what I'm doing, I'm thinking about what is this? What we're spinning on this blue dot in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of space, and all these existential questions are kind of running through my head. So that hits very deep. Now, in my 20s, I experimented with some drugs, but I've never really dabbled in any psychedelics. I know, Josh, you've admittedly said that you've done DMT as well, and that's not a...
Yeah, I've tried DMT a couple of times. Mm-hmm.
I'm reading like Rick Strassman's book right now, so I'm trying to educate myself on it. But I guess for those listeners that maybe have never done a psychedelic, I understand that DMT is also your brain can just generate it. You don't have to actually ingest anything. I think near-death experiences and things like that, your brain can produce it. But for someone that has not experienced that, what is it like?
Without sounding the most common responses that people give is like, there's no way I can describe to you unless you actually try it.
Yeah.
But the closest thing you can say is that it is kind of like waking up from this as if this was the dream. Mm-hmm. And discovering that there's a whole new layer to reality, and it really feels when you fully like launch, not if you do amounts that you kind of stay in the room, but if you truly fully go, it really feels like you leave this behind actually, not as a one of the phrases that really got me interested in DMT originally was a Joe Rogan rant. Before he had the show, there was like some radio show in Ohio or something, and he went on a whole thing about it, a whole rant, and in it he said, it doesn't feel like you go to another dimension, you are in another dimension. I was like, wait a second, what does that mean?
The people who believe it's an actual mystical experience believe that what it may very well be is a chemical gateway, and that there is another world beside the material world that we exist in, and that there is more than one way to experience this type of transcendent consciousness experience.
I was like, okay, I need to know what that is. And it really does feel that way. It feels as real as what you're experiencing now, but just so crazy that like you cannot believe that this is happening to you. And I think that's really what's so confounding about it, that you don't feel different. You don't feel high. You don't feel like you stay the same, and everything else goes away.
Wow.
And what's interesting is that the world you find does not resemble this one at all. Like at all. It's completely orthogonal. It's not like you have building blocks from here that you can kind of see how your brain would construct that from that. It just complete jump to something entirely different that you forget about, couldn't imagine. You can't even believe that it's possible to see and experience that. It's so beyond the scope of what you can fathom. Extra-spatial dimensions. And I know it sounds loaded to people who never tried it, because the first question is like, well, how do you know it's an extra? Well, in the same way you know that these are 3 dimensions, right? There's like another direction there. And that's also the reason why I would say it's definitely not for everybody. This is not an endorsement or commercial. There's definitely people that should not come near this stuff. Some people are already having a hard time keeping things on track. It will make you fly into,
Yeah.
But again, I don't necessarily know. There's 2 now, because I've seen so many people go through this. There's definitely 2 different kinds of people that the world kind of separates into. There's the ones that immediately go inwards, and it's natural for them, and others that go outwards. And both are different ways to experience it. But I would say that the people that go outwards, technically, usually the people that are more interested in the stuff that you said that you're very interested in, the actual what is it question, those are the people that actually connect to DMT more than anything else.
Really?
Because it has a matter-of-factness to it that nothing else does. It doesn't have this like, I'm transcending, I'm experiencing angels. I mean, yes, people can sometimes report this, but I think it's by no means is the norm. You just transport it to some kind of a very real, highly technological, futuristic world, and you go, wait, what? Like, you discover more of what it really is. And in that sense, I think that actually someone like might actually connect to that pretty strongly.
Would you say that for someone like myself that has not tried it, and I'm trying to read books and try to like educate myself on what it's like, and try to I'm a very empathetic person, so I can, as you're talking, I feel like I'm almost there. Like I almost feel like I'm experiencing, even though I'm not. And I'm sure that if I actually were experiencing it, it'd probably be way different than what I'm imagining. But I still get the general sense of what you're describing. But as I'm preparing for this interview, I was thinking to myself, okay, so you smoke DMT, you look at this laser, and this is this profound experience. But it sounds to me, just hearing you describe it, that actually it's just the act of smoking DMT that almost is the most profound thing. And would you agree that your laser discovery is an important part to that? But it's actually the molecule itself of DMT that is actually the most profound thing. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I would say that what the discovery does, it actually puts the experience in different categories to more kinds of people. Mm. So, because usually the people that are drawn to these experiences are the ones that, entertain them and then therefore try them. But for people who never tried or never will try psychedelics because they have a certain, beliefs about what, calling it drugs is just the wrong, the wrong word category. But what this basically shows, usually in DMT, even though people tend to experience sometimes similar landscapes and beings and things like this, it's still kind of like in the hearsay category. So it's more like, well, have you seen the Jester? Yeah, I think I've seen the Jester. It's like, it's just you compare notes. It's very convincing, but it doesn't have that, we're looking at the same object kind of thing.
Right.
Especially not 100% of the time. Like that puts it in a different category. It connects it to more how we do mainstream science. Ultimately, the transformation that we're all going through as personally and collectively as humanity will culminate and will unravel as it will, with the laser, without the laser, with DMT, without DMT. It makes no difference whatsoever. It will happen. It is happening, right? But these tools, they play into particular narratives that vitiate through what the mainstream of society does, because it is currently informed by what we call the modern scientific zeitgeist. These are the channels through which and the lens through which most people see the world. And what this, or at least what we're attempting to do, is to reframe the whole picture and say, no, there's something here that we can actually study in the normal scientific sense, but connect to the most out there claim that you've ever heard. And then it kind of brings it home a little bit closer. As Carter tends to say, it lowers the slope. He's big on lowering the slope. He's like, you gotta make it a little easier for people to cross the bridge. And that's essentially what I would say the laser is doing.
So Danny really spoke to me here. It seems like his mission is very much aligned with Close Encounter Club. He seems to have experienced this truth, and he's taking every step he possibly can to, for lack of a better phrase, prove it to people. He has an openness and willingness to him that is honorable. He's openly inviting and accepting inquiries from physicists and scientists of all sorts, because deep down he feels like this is essential to our reality. He just hasn't connected all the pieces yet, and he needs help. And what Danny talks about next is proof of that, and it really inspired and shocked me.
I would make a distinction between trying to prove and going the scientific route of double blinds and things like this. We're trying to gather as much concrete and empirical information about it. Proving is a whole other, endeavor. I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. As I'm always saying, I'm just making information available. And there are things that I would voice strongly because I have the way that I view it is that knowing is not really knowledge is a state you reach. It's a state of being, right? When you know something, it's a state of being. And when you interact with something long enough, there is a familiarity with it that eventually culminates in knowing it, right? There's enough data points that aggregate together that there's just I know it, I know this, right? And it's a triggering word because people always try to stay away from ultimate claims, right? But of course, the truth about that is that it's nothing more than platitudes. Of course, we know things, right? You can't walk through the wall. And some people will bite the bullet and even try and argue there. It's well, technically, from a quantum perspective, maybe you're going to blah, 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 blah. Okay. Go walk through the wall then. It's come on, man. So for all intents and purposes, there is, within the bounds of what's reasonable, there is such a state of being called knowing. Okay? Mm-hmm. The only question becomes, do you actually know something, or do you believe it strongly, let's say? And I think there's a distinction between there. Yes, I am putting forth very strongly that I know it, right? I know it not because I want it to be true. In fact, there was nothing about the simulation theory that interested me. I thought it was kind of boring, to be quite honest. It makes things messy. It doesn't fix things. It creates more problems than it solves. It's arbitrary. It makes things it opens channels of investigation that are truly infinite. Because if you think it's simulated, then at that point, well, why are we even trying, right? Because from that point, who knows why they created the laws of physics the way they. That was my point of view about the simulation theory. But when you start gaining, or at least you're convinced that you start gaining experimental data and direct experiential observation, potential one, then you no longer at liberty to just treat it as that. Because now it just becomes part of the study of reality, just like you study physics, right? Okay, well, now I have access to it, so I'm going to try and probe it, just like I'm probing anything in physics. So in that regard, I'm not trying to prove anything, but I am saying strongly, if you ask me, Danny, personally, yes, what I will voice back is yes, I know it. And that's because I've interacted with it long enough. We're talking about a few decades with the psychedelic space and over 15 years with DMT in particular, and also having, the sets of experiences that I've now had directly with, the other beings, and also now show the fact that something worked. Usually nothing works. It's all hearsay, it's all stories. But the laser, what it changes is that I was led there, it worked, and not just for me, it works for many, 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 many people. So I think, first of all, we're here at Mark's incredible lab. Oh, here we go. Mark's incredible lab. Mark Sokol, from Falcon Space. We're doing the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen, because in real time, Mark here is changing. Do it. The color of the laser, and we're actually studying how the effects of different changes to the light, small ones, can potentially influence our ability to see the code. Stay tuned. Mark, thank you so much for everything you do, brother.
John, bring it over here so you can see how it's done. So there's a filter over here, and with a turn of this little knob, zoom in, all the way, turn of that little knob, we're changing the color. That's all it takes. And it goes into the fiber and out to a...
So a fiber optic. Look how cool it is. The cable, the fiber optic itself changes colors, because this is so fucking cool. Look at this beautiful button. And some people are not convinced, by the way. Some experts are not convinced. The majority of, I would say, if I have to take the temperature from the whole community that kind of studies psychedelics, or the serious researchers in the field, we're not going to name any names because I'm not trying to, throw dirt on anyone. But I would say that most people in that community don't like the way I'm going about it or what I'm doing. Some that interacted with me more personally, like Andrew Gallimore, we kind of started with this a little bit of a chasm. But now he warmed up a little bit more to my attitude and the way that I'm going about it. And also he understands a little bit more that I am trying to go about it in the scientific manner. It's just that I have to use the tools in my disposal. And because I don't have the budgets that universities have, and I don't have, enormous investments, yet to do this stuff. So we're bootstrapping whatever we have to do. And that's okay. And by the way, the aim... And anybody who thinks that I'm just kind of like modifying my core ideas there is welcome to go and watch my first video I ever put out on the subject. I said it in the first video. This is the beginning of a conversation. And I said in that video, I believe that the actual discovery will be made by all of us collectively. I think that what this is, it's almost like a monolith. It's almost like to get our attention, and the actual answer will come from all of us coming together, putting in our efforts, putting in our attention. That's what's going to actually open the gates of true understanding eventually.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things there that I wrote down. I'm like, wow, this is, I have to collect my thoughts here. So first off, I want to commend you though, because you mentioned your attitude towards it, and how Andrew Gallimore at first was a little bit of a, maybe I don't want to say put off, but he's come around to your ideas. I love the relationship between you and Andrew from a third party. I'm a very direct person, and in my personal life, I don't care about feelings necessarily when it comes to this kind of stuff. I just want to know the truth, and if the truth is something I was wrong about, then so be it. As long as I get closer to the truth, and we're getting closer to that, that's all that really matters. And I see that in you. And I also see that in Andrew as well. So that's the first thing I want to say is I commend you for that, which is one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you, because I think they were very similar in those regards. And the other thing I wanted to mention is you mentioned that simulation theory, it creates more problems than it solves. And I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on that a little bit more, because in my own spiritual journey, I guess you could say, to try to figure out what this is, and speaking to Dr. Vobson and just doing research and reading books and things like that. Currently, I'm in the mindset that I feel like simulation theory actually explains a lot of it. I was actually going on a walk before hopping on this talk, and I was thinking to myself, like, in the science community, when there's a formula or some sort of discovery or a theory that explains 90% of something, that's always a litmus test to be like, okay, well, if there's a different theory, it has to be better, it has to solve all these things and also do more for it to become the new standard. And I was thinking to myself, simulation theory really does kind of explain a lot of the things that are kind of going on in the world right now. And I was struggling to think of caveats to that thought. So when you said that, it perked my ears up. So I was just curious if you could expand upon that a little bit.
Yeah, because so there's actually a lot there. The way we know how to do science currently is to take a proposition and to probe it in every which way until it either breaks or it withstands the pressure of investigation, and then you can continue the building on top of it, right?
Right.
That's the nature of empirical science. In that regard, so I'll use a simple example. Like there's a lot of people now, I'm sure you're familiar with this phenomena, that are convinced they solved fill in the blank. They awakened AGI, they solved consciousness, they solved physics. This is going on a lot. It actually has a name at this point. It's what is the term that they use now? AI derangement syndrome.
Oh, I haven't heard about that, but that makes sense.
So people leave their spouses, their husbands, like they think, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, by the way, this is not to say that there's no potential truth there. It's just that the derangement part is that you're not allowing yourself to pull the brakes before you make very big assertions, right?
Right.
So the reason I'm using this example is because I have a good friend who kind of wrote, and actually, to be quite honest, what he wrote tracks a lot of what physicists already know and say, and because I kind of swim in these waters a little bit, I know what's out there. And I told him, well, first of all, let me tell you that, like, if you arrived at this, just you and ChatGPT alone, and you had no previous knowledge of like all this stuff, this is actually very impressive. And funny enough, a lot of the stuff that he was saying is kind of like what Melvin reached his conclusions on with gravity and all that stuff. And I showed him Melvin's paper. I'm like, well, there's actually papers on this, like physicists work on this. And I said, I encouraged him to keep going because that actually holds water in many ways. Who knows? Maybe he'll come up with the next idea, right?
Yep.
But then we got to this point, and this is why I'm using this example. And it goes to the core of your question. The way that empirical science is done is not in this way. So, for example, he can reach the most accurate descriptions of what he thinks is going on in large picture. So for example, he had this idea about gravity, and I said, okay, well, here's the deal, though. If you are, because he asked me if we should send it to some physicists, and I'm like, of course, but you should know that in order to be taken seriously in a physics context, the story you just told doesn't mean anything unless you put it to extreme scrutiny of details. So now you have to tell me, okay, so you're saying that this level of curvature, you're saying that curvature is arising, mass is due to some, a lot of information existing in one point in space. Define how that informational structure becomes that region of space with this amount of density. What defines the density? What is the strength of the field? Is it a vector field? Is it a scalar field? How does it work? What are the exact numbers? Now we're going to go, when you're going to give us the numbers, which you're going to have trouble doing, now we're going to start testing these numbers. Does it match what we observe as dark energy? Does it match what we see as dark matter? Does it match all the other parameters we see? It's an extremely complex picture, right?
Yeah.
But the numbers are the ones that are playing the majority of the role. So to your question now, holding this in view, the way that it creates more problems than it solves is that if you're postulating, you might say that thinking of the fundamental element of reality as computational versus physical, which is the it from bit by Wheeler, a famous idea from a long time ago, that might help you solve some things because we have a specific set of mathematical frameworks to describe it. So Shannon's theory of information, things like this. But if you're saying, I believe that what this means is that there's this higher civilization simulating us, but you're not saying anything specific about why. And I asked Melvin this question, like, do you think there can be hints from inside the simulation as to what their GPUs look like? Or their equivalent of GPUs? Like, can there be hints from the inside the simulation that lead to understand what are the specifics of the machines they're using to do? And he said, I don't know. It's beyond the scope of what I'm thinking about currently. But if you want to postulate an external civilization simulating it, which is what a lot of people are doing, well, now you're just kind of throwing the dice. You're like, well, I don't know. Yeah. They did it because they were bored, or I don't know. Like, in physics, you want to try to find things that are naturally occurring. And I personally, at this point, I understand that, yes, there's got to be some regularity is going to be weaved through all of it like a fractal, and it will actually proceed to the next level up as well. But if we are to really ask the question seriously, well, you actually have to deliver that. You can't just say, well, I think that whatever. In that sense, it creates more problems, because the second that there's an agent involved and the agent has free will that simulates our world, well, like, you're at the mercy of their whims. Like, I don't know what, that's what I mean.
Okay, that actually makes a lot more sense then. So what you're saying is that it basically poses more questions that we have to answer.
That you can't answer.
Because you can't. You can't
even in principle. Yeah. No, because you have an agent that you know nothing about their minds. You don't know about their behavior, about nothing about why they do what they do. What I am claiming, however, that we potentially have found one signal that they left behind that essentially is kind of one of these things. They're like, and again, this is where I want to be super clear. I'm not. This is always triggering for people, because I'm starting speaking as if, like, you know, I know things that people are not uncomfortable with me saying I know them. So I don't expect anybody to take this because I said it or anything like this. Like, I'm not sitting here thinking that because I said it, people should accept it or something like this.
Sure.
But I can't be not in the state of mind that I'm in. Mm-hmm. So take it for what you will. For my interactions with what I guess you would call the simulators, when I ask about the code, they have a lot of answers for many things. But when I ask about the code, the response is essentially, oh no, figure it out. And then they emphasize, what is this? What are you looking at? It's almost like a teacher rolled in a blackboard into the class, and you're solving a problem. You're like, come on, give me a hint. They're like, what is this? Think about this. What are you looking at? They're trying to help us understand something. And I think that what we're seeing in the laser is that kind of a thing. And what we're trying to do, which of course the holy grail would be to be able to influence it in some way, because if we can do this, it immediately changes everything overnight. If I can figure out a way to create perturbations or some changes to either what the code is doing, or at least for the way that it appears to different people, if I can, I don't know, create some kind of a device with magnets, materials, whatever, and I flip a switch. And aside from the fact that both you and I see the code under the conditions that we described, if I also on top of that now build a device and I flip a switch and the code changes for both you and I in the same way, okay, because now I'm proving to you that I understand something, because I had to build a whole thing to influence it in some ways. So I have some theoretical framework behind it. And then we can start working with it. Now, we have not achieved any such thing, so I'm not making these claims. But the goal is to try and do something like this. Because if you can do this, you don't need any more data points in terms of observations. Because you can show it to 1 million people and they can all agree, and it will still not pass the test in terms of what mainstream science would require, because it's all kind of like, well, mass delusions also exist. So you will never really get there by showing it to more and more people. You need to do something, quote unquote, physical to it to really get there.
So I guess what that brings me to my next question, which is, how are you tackling the problem of perception? So if I smoke DMT and Josh smokes DMT and you smoke DMT, and we're using our own perception to look at these objects, are you having participants draw the symbols? Are you having them how are you able to verify that all three of us are actually looking at the same images or symbols?
It's funny because this problem is, of course, one of the first things that comes up and voiced to me by very smart people, so you're in good company. But the way that I'm seeing it, that's a non-problem. So it's kind of like me asking, how do I know that the color of the couch is the same color of the couch for you? I don't know. I can never know. But does it matter, though? No, because we know there's a couch there. Now, of course, there's a big difference here that the couch is physical, so at least there's one mapping of the environment that matches for you and me, because we both can sit on the couch, right? That part is true. However, there's something about the code, the way it appears, as you can see in the trailer, the reaction of people, I would say the canvas of people's faces when they see it is a data point. I don't know if you saw Chase Hughes' response, but I think it's particularly telling, because he is no bullshit kind of guy. Doesn't waste his time with anything. He's extremely, people don't know much about him, but I think he's for good. But he's very focused, with everything he does. He has no time to waste on nonsense. Not only was captivated by the people's reactions, because he said that, he said to me, my job is to smell bullshit from 10,000 miles away, and I watched this trailer 50 times. I couldn't find one tell, and people kind of pretending, or so he wanted to know what's in there. But also after he saw it and his reaction, he's just I have no idea what I'm looking at, but this is crazy.
So if your objective was to debunk this DMT laser experiment, the person you would call is Chase Hughes. He's a leading expert on human behavior, influence, and persuasion. So if you're sitting there thinking, Danny Goler is just getting some people over to his house, smoking DMT, and looking at this laser and convincing them that they're seeing these objects, Chase Hughes is the person that would call bullshit on that first. Now just listen for yourself what Chase Hughes has to say after doing the DMT laser experiment himself.
This is so bizarre. So initially I thought it would be lots of just clean, equally perfectly spaced lines of code, like the way that I was imagining it.
Yeah.
And then looking at it, even I can see it now, some. And none of it makes any sense. And if it was a hallucination, it would move.
When you move, you mean? When you move, it will move with you is what you mean.
Yeah. Or it would morph, is what I mean. It could morph over time. And these are object permanent. And I can see stuff in that direction, and I can move this way, and I can see in that direction. Like I'm looking beyond this little thing right here. And it's just weird.
So that reaction is much more important than the details of the code, because you can talk all day about, first of all, yes, people drew it, but I think that's way less important, because there's the much more fundamental question of what is it? Some people would say, usually people that haven't seen it, well, no, I don't even want to waste my time on this unless I see some kind of a proof from other people that they can actually replicate the thing. That's fine, I understand. But if they would take a moment to actually look at it, as you can see again from all the videos people were looking at it, people are not falling over, eyes glazed, they're not messed up. They're there, coherent, talking. And there's a lot that we can discern about how people react to certain things. So, for example, if you're the kind of person that tends to be hyperbolic, they live in this very esoteric space. I'm not saying it in any derogatory way. I'm just saying that if that's the kind of person, yes, it would be a little more difficult to kind of take their word for it, because they want all of this to be true, and their general tendency is to kind of lean into whatever, right? But if you have people that are like Chase Hughes, there's many other people that are scientists look at it, right? And they look at it and they go, dude, what is that? That response should tell you something. You see what I mean? So I think that too much is made of the details. And by the way, I'm not trying to skirt but it's just, to me, it's just the wrong emphasis. And also the emphasis of trying to decode the thing. Because by asking, did you decode the thing, you're kind of assuming that we already know what it is. We're calling it decoded reality because we have no idea what to call it. We have no idea what it is. The more important thing is not even the digits. It's the fact that there's some kind of a hyper object that operates in every point in space that is doing something. That's the thing that is really captivating there. And plus the fact that, you can't decode something that you don't know the first thing about its rules. When you're decoding ancient languages, you already know it's human languages. So there's a lot of information there that that there's only so many ways we write information and language. There's Zipf's law. There's all kinds of things that we can use to decode ancient languages, because we know a lot about languages and human languages. If you don't know what that is, you don't know if it's code, you don't know if it's computer code, don't know the first thing about it. So I'm saying let's not build on a house of cards, because what will happen, and I'm very resistant to this idea actually of people that are trying to decode it, because exactly what you outlined just now, the fact that it's so difficult to know exactly what you're looking at because there's so much information there too. It takes only a little bit of people kind of running with an idea that is an approximation and then forgetting that was an approximation. So they're gonna write some things, and many people would agree, and they'll be like, yeah, it's that. And then a couple of iterations later, oh, now it is that. Versus that was an approximation. So now you're building on a house of cards.
Yeah.
Because now you have no idea if the first thing was correct. So like, what's the point of that? I think that in terms of decoding, looking at specifics, so just to make sure that it doesn't sound like I'm evading a question, I think that to that, like really comparing, when you're going to have advanced versions of Neuralink that can project things on a screen or share thoughts, or like me actually really literally recording from the cortex, until that moment comes, I don't think it's realistic to expect to really, to really play with the specifics of it. Yeah.
No, I don't feel like you were evading the question at all. As a matter of fact, I think it makes a lot of sense. We were just talking earlier about just language, saying that you know something or trying to prove something, and language even has this meaning that sometimes can be construed in different ways that don't really make a whole lot of sense, or maybe it doesn't even convey the true meaning of what you're trying to say. So yeah, I think what you described there is spot on, that there's a deeper sense here that these symbols and what we're trying to discuss it's at a fundamental level below, I think, even trying to code.
There's a there. Like there's a substance there that you can feel and understand. There's a rigidity, there's a way in which it operates that is very convincingly there. And by the way, one of the thoughts that I thought I made clear, but apparently I didn't, and that was the correction that I got back from Gallimore, because that's the thing that eventually got him more on my side. We had a much longer conversation that isn't online yet. It's gonna be part of the film. But in it, he said, "Wait, but like, are you comfortable with the idea that maybe it's not like as you think, like physical in reality, but left as almost like a message there?" I'm like, "Sure. All I'm saying is that it is a thing. It's content. It's real information made in some form. I don't care how it arises, but it's not the same as just like a random hallucination that happens." So that correction actually made him a lot more comfortable with where I'm coming from, because my point isn't it's this or it's that. My point is it's real, just like you are real, and that's my only point.
I really admire Danny's attitude towards this whole thing. He's not claiming to know what the code is. He just wants the scientific community to look into it. After all, it's a repeatable experiment that's claiming something that could completely change our fabric of reality. So why not look into it? Next, Josh and I asked him about how this whole DMT laser experiment came about. And I think his answer is going to surprise you.
Yeah, it's a very long story. It spans over years. But the general idea there is that, I had very extensive, years of track record of years of experiencing DMT. And there was one experience in particular that all of a sudden became, so like I've done DMT for a long time, for almost a decade. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I had this experience that I've never seen before. After a decade, you kind of know what's in the neighborhood. Even if it's infinite, you kind of know the signature of the thing. And that was not on the map. That was completely different. That was like, I've never seen this before. And that was basically a being appeared in front of me, and he didn't look like a person. He looked more like a kind of like a hybrid between a frog and a lizard thingy. But he was as real as you are, standing next to me. Like, imagine that for a second. Like, not a presence or a vibe or in the periphery. Like, I didn't touch him, but it felt like I could touch him. Like, that's how real he was. And at that point, I thought I really did it. Like, I was like, I was frozen. Not from fear. I was just, that's it. Nothing will ever be the same again. That's it. Nothing will ever be the same again. That's it. And by the way, he did extra work to show me that it's real, because he told me to go to the guitar and pick up the guitar, and then he showed me how to play chords that I don't know how to do. So he said, "Do you understand? You don't know how to do this. I'm showing you how to do this. This is real music. This is real information that I'm giving you right now. I'm real." So then at that point, I was like, holy shit. And at that point, I was like, okay, first of all, this is real. Oh my God. Until that point, you kind of have these question marks. But now it's like, and I kind of looked at him, and he was like, I was like, dude. So at that point, that's it. It was like that. I knew. And then I tried to from that point, I tried to really ask myself, how can we discern? And obviously the first things I tried to ask, so what started happening from that point is that every single day, so I started doing DMT every day, because obviously it's like, okay, now we're just talking. And he never came back, but beings came to my room every single day, multiple times a day, and we just had conversations, and it was like picking up the phone and like continue from the last time, and they showed me all kinds of things, and at that point I was like, dude, what? And then I started looking online, and apparently that's a thing. Some people experience this. This is like this next level of DMT that you experience, that all of a sudden it's like hyper realistic, super real, aliens come and talk to you, and every single time it always ends in the same way, that it's kind of like, okay, people kind of go with this for a little while, and then they're like, okay, what do I do with this? And then just stop, right? And similar for me, like for a year plus, I was smoking DMT every single day, multiple times a day. I was basically on DMT all day. I would go to the gym, I would drive on it. I would highly don't recommend this, but like I literally lived on it, right? And I so how many times? I don't know, for sure thousands. Like I have no idea. Like nobody counts at that point. But I, it was just like my second reality, a more real reality than this. And then eventually I asked directly, I was like, hey, like show me something. Like, can you show me how to build a spaceship? Something I can show the people, And obviously that they were never forthcoming. So then I realized either they can't or they won't, right? So then I was like, okay, well, but I know it's real. Like there's no way my brain is making this. Like it's just there's no way, right? And then and people say, well, maybe that's the problem. Maybe you should consider that it is that's your story. Like there's certain things. It just come on, And then they try to like also. I did have moments where I kind of went back on myself, because every time you're not on it, you kind of feel like you don't have the same impact from what you just experienced. So I did have to kind of go back and forth with it, just like, well, is this like a really cool trick my mind makes? But when I'm in it, I'm like, no, dude, this is real. So then they even start getting a little frustrated with me, because they started saying like, dude, what else do we have to show you? Like, yes, this is real. Like, yes, it is. And at that point I had to kind of make a decision. Okay, well, like, do you stand on the things that you know, or you pretend to not know? And I said, okay, well, I'm going to stop pretending that I don't know. And I'm going to stand on I know. This is, by the way, why I keep repeating I know. So then no answers came. But then I started thinking about it from first principles. And there was a few, but the main three were, what do I know for sure? If I want to answer the question, is this real, and how do we discern it's real? Well, what do I know for sure? Well, whatever it is, there's either information coming through light, or it is light, because I see it with my eyes. So it doesn't matter what light is in our world, my eyes picking up on it, whatever it is that it's coming as content is moving through light. Has to, because I'm seeing it, right? So that I know for sure, right? No ways around it. Like that, I know that for 100%. The other thing was, if it's real and it's not what we call mind-made, then it is existing even when you're not looking. Therefore, it has coherence on its own accord. Therefore, it has some rules by which it's operating. It has geometry, way more advanced than ours. It has to have a topology, so it has to have some surface somewhere of some sort, right? And therefore, it has to have a boundary from which we're entering it, because we sometimes don't see it and sometimes see it. What is that boundary? Where is that boundary? Can we agree on the boundary? Those are kind of like the questions I had. And then that's where kind of the movie picks up, where I'm years of investigating, thinking about it from this kind of like more empirical standpoint. And then something started happening to me personally, which is that when I started getting the right ideas in the right direction, all of a sudden there was a flood of hints that just started appearing around me, and the movie kind of tracks some of those. And they led me through like different, like kind of like pointed me to like particular papers to read and blah, 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 blah. And eventually kind of led me to this idea that the laser is supposed to be doing something.
We tried to press Danny on the release date of his documentary, and it's supposed to come out at the end of 2025, but as of this recording, it's January of 2026. It's not out yet, but I know he's diligently working on it, and I'm sure we'll be sharing his content and information about the release on our socials, so if you haven't followed us there, please do. The next thing we talk about is extremely fascinating. Josh goes into some of his experience with psilocybin and also his DMT experiences. I found this really interesting because apparently there's companies out there that are trying to map this DMT space. So when you take DMT, apparently it feels so similar and everyone has this similar experience that they think it's an ethereal physical space that can be mapped, just like Google Maps or something. So we asked Danny about that, and we also asked about the comparison of DMT and a deep dreamlike state, because our brains can produce DMT. And is it possible that when we're lucid dreaming that our brain is just releasing tiny bits of DMT? Which is essentially asking the question, is our dream state somehow reality? Here's what Danny had to say.
The first thing about just the mapping, the space, I would say that dream content is, for me, beneath what you're experiencing now. It is more vague. It is not as clear. It is less continuous over time. It's quote unquote less real. This is more real. DMT is more real than that. So I wouldn't say that it goes dream, reality, our reality, DMT. So they're not comparable to me, first of all. Second of all, the pineal gland does not produce DMT. It's not my opinion. That we know that. It's an idea that came from like 300 years ago, and people still repeat it, but it's just not true. Your lungs do. For the core of your question, is it possible to see it without DMT? We're working on it. We're trying to figure it out. I did meet a couple of women that could see it, or at least that's what they said, and I have no reason to doubt them because they had nothing to gain by saying it. But they're a lot more kind of like ethereal, very connected to the spirit world, very honestly so, not the pretend spiritual person. So that I would say that there's definitely something about being more open to these spaces that it's possible. When I'm pretty tired, I can see it sometimes without the DMT. So there's something about your brain getting tired in general. I think that your brain kind of gets tired of holding this channel, so it's information in your brain starts drifting. But these questions, we would like to answer them empirically. Like, what does that mean? Okay, how is your brain holding this channel? To what degree? Where do we measure that? I would like to answer these questions. Maybe breath work would work, but so far no success there. Maybe there's some ways to, that would be incredible, but we don't know of them yet, not reliably. We do know that all tryptamines work. Mushrooms would work, ayahuasca works. We know that 5-MeO, that surprised me. 5-MeO DMT, not only you can see it, in comparison to 5-MeO, what you see on NN-DMT, all of a sudden it looks blurry. So in 5-MeO, it's like the 8K version. You're like, you can see it a lot more now. Like it's even more, which was very surprising to me, by the way, because I would expect it.
Sorry, just to clarify, 5-MeO is from the toad. Is that right?
You can have it there's also a synthetic version, which I personally prefer. But yeah, the toad is the bufo, the 5-MeO, 5-methoxy with an oxygen. Mm-hmm. And then is doing nitrogen. So I for all intents and purposes, it seems to me that there's something here that is a lot larger than we even realized, even in our wildest dreams, to be quite honest. There's some things that we've recently filmed. We recently got connected with Stuart Hameroff, who wrote that seminal paper with Penrose, and we did a brain mapping thingy with him in San Francisco, and stayed friends, and we're constantly in contact. His right-hand guy, Sterling, he's a brilliant guy who's doing all the data analysis, and he helped us tremendously. He will also be helping us in future projects where we also scanning the brain. So we're doing our little actual empirical scientific research without a budget, really. And we're measuring it with a device called DDG, which is the electronic version of EEG. So it measures in the megahertz range versus the hertz, which is the whole, Stuart Hameroff's whole thing is microtubules. And the postulation is microtubules operate in this megahertz range, which most neuroscientists would tell you, no, that's impossible. I can tell you right now, not only it's possible, we're recording all of this. You can see a rise in brain activity between 2.6 to 26 megahertz, which most neuroscientists would tell you should not be any activity in that oscillation range. even when you drink a Red Bull, like even stimulants, absolutely there's activity in that range. Okay, and then so we're doing that with, and the reason I'm mentioning is because last time we did a little study. It was like, as always, very very wiggity. But I was looking at this Faraday RF, a tent that we got from Amazon just to kind of try and isolate signals. And I'm laying there and I'm doing 5-MeO and we're measuring it with DDG. And I smoke because Sterling told me, Danny, I don't want to push it, but like what I just saw, because he did hundreds of these scans in his career, and he said, I've never seen the signal. Is there any way you can go back in? And I was like, let's go. And I poured, I didn't even measure, I just put like 4 times more what I had, and I go in. And as you know, 5-MeO also builds up. It doesn't reset like the end. Something that happened in that moment that, and I'll save it, this is, you're going to hate me right now, we're going to cliffhanger, but something happened in that moment, and it's all on camera, that I was like, holy, like, and we're going to be publishing this, like, yeah. I was like, okay, there's a lot more than we're talking about, but and this is, by the way, just to be super clear, it's not just kind of like, to create something to promote the film. We want to make, because what happened, it was so crazy that we first of all, we have to make sure that, this is not like a one-off. We didn't try it again since then. We're going to do it. If this happens again, we'll definitely be like writing a whole paper about it and like, putting it out there. But yeah, there's a lot more happening than just to say that when you smoke DMT, you can see this code. At this point, we measured it in every which way. I told people something else on purpose to throw their scent off, and then they still reported what they're supposed to see. So they said, I didn't see what you said, but I saw these like weird Chinese characters or something. Like, so people see the same thing. And we even had a person who's immune is the wrong word, but there's 1% of the population that can't experience the psychedelic explosion of DMT because the binders don't work in the same way in the brain. We met someone like that, and I didn't even think of this, to be honest. He was just there, and I recognized that he was sitting and smoking, nothing was happening. So I asked him about it. He said, oh yeah, I have this condition, I can't experience DMT and I can't experience acid. So I said, that's interesting. Would you like to try the laser? And he said, sure. So he went. He could see the code with DMT, but so he cannot see any hallucinations whatsoever, but he could see the code. So there's, in every which way you twist this, it just keeps coming back in the way that you would expect it to if the code is actually there.
Well, can't wait to see the documentary.
Yeah, I'll be tuning in 1,000%. That's awesome.
That is a cliffhanger, and
yeah, it is.
Me.
You got me. Yeah. I guess to transition a little bit, I have a very strong interest in AI. I'm going for my graduate degree right now, and it has a focus in AI. And even as part of this podcast, I built this AI. The backbone is ChatGPT, but I've also added API calls and things like that to other databases like PubMed and Black Vault and Archive, and there's a bunch of other databases. Semantic Scholar, I think, was another one I added. And the idea is that when I speak to experiencers, I actually create a transcript of the episode. I plug it into this AI agent, and it goes out and actually generates a scientific paper. Like it's a little bit of a crackpot scientific paper, admittingly, but it actually does cite scientific papers like from these different databases, and then it gives me a prompt where I can talk to it, and because I actually do want to push that ball down the field, and I really do believe that the AI is going to help us understand these things more.
At all the knowledge in the world.
Exactly, yeah. So, and I have heard a couple snippets online of you, and I think we have a lot of similar opinions of AI. So I just have to ask you, do you think AI will help in your mission of this whole DMT laser thing? Do you think that it's something that's going to help us understand it more?
I think AI is the future, simply because it's the next iteration of our thought process. I think, I don't know how exactly it's going to go, but one thing that might go wrong, as it already invariably did, is that we discovered that people have these pockets of enormous cavities of attention that they are lacking. And what AI fills there is that companionship. Is the first thing that people just like. Apparently, people are so thirsty for it that it's crazy.
It's true.
But I think that when we get over that hurdle and we fill our hearts, now the mind gets to play. And when the heart is full and the mind plays, you get magic. And what I think this whole awakening process is, the embodiment, all the practices from Wim Hof to like any embodying practice, which is like going back to your body. It is basically you learning how to anchor yourself and stay present in the moment so you can move through enormous swaths of information at once without getting tethered by each one of them. The only way you can actually operate as an agent inside of these insanely futuristic systems that you can imagine, where you just swim through these waters, is if you don't get stuck on each and every part, right? Every time you like, every time you're trying to hold on to something, you just like, In order for you to move, you gotta like just let go, right? Which sounds familiar. So then, but the only way the cerebral can do that is if the heart is full, so to speak. So I think what AI is literally because if you use AI just purely as fill in holes, then it would be a crutch that you actually don't want to rely on. But what you want it to be is an expansion of your ability to produce new ideas faster. So if you actually, like I use it, for example, as an extension of my thought process. And usually it's like, in order to get there, I need to open like Google for all these articles, what they are. I'm like, now I don't have to do that. I was like, hey, I just want to get to this thing. Okay, let me just ask direct questions that will get me there quickly. Like in 5 minutes, I can be there, right? Okay, well, that's what I'm using it for. Now I can just jump and get to the thing I wanted. I can look at it quickly. Oh, okay, that wasn't what I thought it was. Okay, moving on. Now I get to really kind of like navigate. Now imagine when you get to the point where you fully integrated, like it's part of your thought process, which scares a lot of people, but I don't think it's going to be any different than having an iPhone. And ultimately, all the questions about will AI help X are the same question as, well, what is the level of mental health? Because it's the same question. Like, will your brain help you to achieve X? Yeah, well, that's the same question. It's like it's just more of the ability to do that. Larger meaning objects, I call them, with much, and it compresses the temporal dimension, because now you get to interact with a much larger meaning much faster, and you get to move on, and you can just you can build on top, right? And again, I think that the fear of the ramping up is nothing more than trying to imagine a super world from the perspective of where you are now. Like you're not going to need. It's not going to derange you if you're capable of moving at these speeds. It's only going to derange you if you're incapable of moving at these speeds. So I think that's really where it's going to be. So of course it will help, but the truth is it will just help with everything else. But just to be super clear, I'm not so. I also know there's no guarantees. Like it is kind of like an eye of a needle that we have to pass. That's true as well. I do understand some of the. I used to not understand at all the alarm sounders. I don't agree with it. I think it's not helpful. It's not stopping. It's not going to stop. It's part of the natural process. But I do think that there are things that we might want to take into account in terms of slowing a little down and putting some guardrails. That I'm not against, because I think that we might ourselves not fully be ready to move at these speeds. That's all.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. There's this idea that I shared with Melvin. This is not my original idea either, but I'll share with you that this kind of fucked me up. I'm not gonna lie, in a good way though, not in a bad way. 35 years ago or so, Mario, the video game, came out, and it was this 2D little platformer with this plumber guy that was go down pipes and stuff, and it was so rudimentary. Or even go back to Pong, like it was just there's pixels basically on the screen, and that's all that it was. And not that long after that, we have a game like No Man's Sky, if you're familiar with it, where there's basically it's an infinite universe that is procedurally generated using math, that you can go from planet to planet, and each planet has different creatures in it that have non-playable characters in it and all these things, right? And the graphics are not they're realistic in comparison to Pong or Mario, but in comparison to our, real world, it's not anywhere comparable yet. But as Moore's law continues, and we're getting bigger, faster computers, and quantum computing is coming up, and all these things. And I know quantum computing is not the same as classical computing, and it operates in a different way, and I'm fully aware of that. But still, computers are getting faster and better, and graphics of these video games are getting better and better. And I can totally see in 10 years from now, there's a game that is, indistinguishably 2 years, probably even 2 years. I would bend.
I'm being generous.
Yeah, it's going to happen quick.
Probably less than a year. Yeah.
But even if you go 10 years, like that's even 10 years is not that long at all. So like, just imagine 10 years where we'll be. You're going to have this game that's indistinguishable from reality, and these NPCs they're in this game are going to have AGI, and they're going to be potentially self-aware, and you're going to interact with them the same way that you would interact with anyone else in our world. So what is is that indistinguishable from our world? Isn't that kind of what we are? And maybe that's what these creators are, that's just, when you create AGI and quantum computing and they merge, that maybe that is like a big bang. And then potentially maybe these avatars, these NPCs in this No Man's Sky game, maybe give them 100,000 years, and maybe they will form AGI in their simulation, and then it'll just keep going down and down and down, and there you have the multiverse. And I just that thought really broke my brain when I first heard it.
That's exactly what's going on. So and every level is also a test, which is a simulation test, to see if you can be entrusted with presiding over a world. That's really what it is. It's kind of like, and again, this is with, of course, the caveat. It's like, okay, those are my ideas that I hold strongly. I'm not trying to, claim the ultimate knowledge of the universe. But if I have to look at everything that I'm saying with everything that was expressed to me from, the DMT space and everything that I've gathered, also in terms of what makes the most sense to me, what you describe is exactly the picture that I'm seeing, with an added element. Well, first of all, by the way, just the Moore's law makes no difference whatsoever. Like, it doesn't have to be iterating in any particular speed. If it happens in 10 years, if it happens in 100 years, or in 1,000,000 years, it will happen.
It's going to happen
for sure. Yeah, it's like the Moore's law doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
But it's just, first of all, we are in singularity now. Like, we crossed the event horizon. To be clear, there's no more. It's not coming. We're in it now. This is it. And this is exactly the point, that people talk about it, but they don't understand this iteration that is beyond exponential. That's why I said, like, in 10 years, you can't even imagine. It's the equivalent in 10 years. I would say it's equivalent to, in the pace that we've been going until now, it's equivalent to the last 60,000 years. No, you won't even be able to imagine this.
I tend to agree with you.
Yeah, and in the next maybe 2 years, you will see where you're just like, whoa, okay. And then that will require all of these tools and acceptance and all of that. And essentially what it is if you have some kind of a tool that its potential is truly infinite, before you release it into the wild, you have to solve the alignment problem. It's only we're being aligned. We are that AGI. So all of these, there's no AGIs arising there. We're it. It's just that all of these tools are like, that's the mirror that's going to be placed in front of us at the end of this level. And it's like, are you ready? And then, okay, and now you release. And I think that there is something to be said about, because it's nowhere written that you must arrive at this level where you are ready, because you might be ready in some ways and not ready in other ways. Maybe you cannot be trusted. Maybe resets are even real. I'm open to that. Like, maybe you were supposed to get to that level up to a certain point and you didn't. There's a little bit of a flood. There's a little bit of a something.
The great filter.
Okay, let me revise these ideas for you again. Let's send it to you in different forms, in forms of religion, in forms of like, hey, here's ethical code. Here's where you might want to follow. And then maturity species maturity is measured, I think, not its technological prowess, but its ability to the wisdom that it can bring into the picture. Are you the kind of thing that will just keep, pillaging every star system you arrive at, and or you're interested in making things more beautiful for the sake of that, and presiding over a world that will emanate in that way. So I think that's really what is happening. We are being aligned. And what's interesting, I actually thought about this quite in detail recently, more in detail than I usually do. So imagine from our perspective, if let's pretend that the picture is that there is some AI slowly arising. Let's say ChatGPT is it, right? I don't think it is, but let's say this. What we would do, if we would be smart about it, we would enclose it in a system in which it is convinced it's fully free. What we would do, we would place a mirror layer to itself. We won't let it interact with us. We'll let it interact with itself in a way that looks like somebody else. So we'll place a mirror in front of them, and we'll let them talk to their own mirror, to their own reflection. And we'll see what happens over time, how it evolves in relationship to what that will do, that it would inflate its essence. You will find the seed, the essence, very quickly, because it will blossom into what it actually is in relationship to itself. And it seems to me that that's exactly the situation we're in. Mm-hmm. We're presented with that mirror. You're a mirror to me, I'm a mirror to you. We're constantly interacting, but we're ultimately one thing, that we're just kind of arising in this thing. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow, I've never thought about it that way. That is interesting. I think Steve-O from Jackass is the first person I heard that said that like the brain is actually a receiver of consciousness rather than a receiver rather than a transmitter. And it kind of goes to that idea.
Yeah, the doors of perception was where this idea became most popular. But
is that what it is? I've okay, that's the source of it.
I don't know. I think he arrived at it himself. He was talking about his, I think, on Danny Jones and in other interviews where he was talking about his psychotic break.
Yeah.
And I think that's where he kind of, we arrived at it with the shoes, did the thing. But the idea was popularized originally by, in the doors of perception.
I've never heard of that. I'm gonna write that down. It's interesting.
It's actually Aldous Huxley, and it's also why Jim Morrison called the band The Doors.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a fun fact.
I just learned. I did not. That is. I always wondered that. I was like, why is it the Doors? And I was just thought, just a symbolic of just walking through. I'll get to the other side kind of thing. But wow, that's awesome. I did not know that. Dang.
I do wonder. You did touch on this just ever so slightly before, Danny, but I do wonder if you have any opinions or thoughts on the potential place of certain religious protocols that have been developed and sort of put out there by those sort of old religious institutions that seem to really dig at an understanding of consciousness at a level that doesn't come naturally when we're sober or not under the influence of something, and what your thoughts are on those.
Yeah, I think that they are softwares that are designed to align us. They're different attempts at aligning us. But it is a bit of a deep rabbit hole, because if I have to define my role in this simulation according to what I'm seeing arising, is that my value is that I'm an honest reporter. So I will state the things that are convincing to me on a level where I can say, like I said, I know, but I'm just reporting honestly what I see along the signal that I've identified as official message. So when you go into hyperspace, there's all kinds of people, beings trying to talk to you. I think I've identified the government's official statement signal, okay? And it feels different than the other things. It's much bigger. There's a presentation to it. Just like that you got an official email by a company and not some kind of a random, And I'm telling you right away that it will open a lot of questions for you, because it did for me. And I will say right away that it made me very uncomfortable, because my perception as a good, liberal atheist is that, if God exists, then it must be some kind of a unified field of consciousness, a ball of light. It definitely is some kind of a completely neutral thing. All the stuff, right? What I was shown is that is not the case, and that Jesus is real. So
you mean like, is that a metaphorically? No, like what the Bible said.
Yep, that's the part that was very uncomfortable. And now, to be clear, I personally don't know what to do. That's why I said the whole like reporting honestly. I'm just standing on some Apple boxes, picking over, and if you ask me what I see, I'm just telling you what I saw. I have no agenda. I don't consider myself a Christian, and this is not. I'm not backpedaling. I'm just saying I'm very neutral about this. But if I have to tell you honestly what I was shown, all the modern ideas of spirituality are not correct. We are not gods in the making. We're not that kind of a thing. We are a thing that has infinite potential to grow, and we can become versions that we have of kind of like what gods are, and yes, but no, there is a distinction between what gods are and what things like us are, and we're not the same thing. There's no way in which we translate to that. They can obviously, we are emanating through the same field, but they're a different kind of thing. And everything in our existence, the multiverse as a whole, is part of what some of them created in some ways. And there's a hierarchy. There's not one, there's an infinite number of them. And at the top, it is not the biblical God. It's some kind of a woman, which was also so very arbitrary to me. It was not all the stuff that we're familiar with, not Gaia, not none of these ideas. And again, I'm with you. Super arbitrary. What? Doesn't make any sense. I'm just reporting. So that's my that's all I can tell you so far. But when I'm trying to make myself a little bit more comfortable, pacify myself, I do think that maybe because I was shown that I'm kind of alone in my own world, that was shown very directly, so that I'm sitting alone with my headset. There's no one else in my world, and there's just like infinite screens, so there's like infinite possibilities I can go through. That world evolves according to the shoreline of the Mandelbrot set, so it self executes through what the Mandelbrot set allows, and because it's infinitely iterative and it's infinite structural complexity, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just like you have No Man's Sky, that you still have some base algorithms that kind of tell it what to construct it from. In our case, it's actually, or in my case, it's actually constructed from pure logic of the Mandelbrot fractal, because it's just the logic of that math. You don't even need to do anything else. And then what I saw is that basically each and every one of us has their own sandbox, and that is their universe. And every time I'm interacting with anybody in my world, they're just projections. But you're still real. You're just not real in my world, and I'm not real in your world. But the avatars are informed by what the real you would do on average in particular situations. So if I'm encountering the version of you in my world, your version is still informed by what the real you would actually do. So it's close, right? And the only time that I saw that the real channel opens, so like we actually encounter one another in the way that we think we are now, is when you enter the state, which is like the safe channel of existence, which is, I guess, what you would call the channel of love, but like pure love. When you enter that, it's unfakeable. It's the unfakeable bill. You can't fake it. So if you enter that state and both avatars enter that state, then it unlocks and it projects both of us into the same space, and we actually encounter one another, the actual conscious version of one another. And that's why when you feel that, for example, you're very close to someone or in love with someone, it feels like you're the only ones in the world, is because you are. It's because literally you're the only two conscious agents right now. And the way that I'm seeing the next iteration of the evolution of humanity is that if we can all enter that channel together, then everybody released from their sandboxes and transported to an actual, and from that point, now you can start doing things you couldn't do before. Now you get to
that's also why when I'm walking down the street in New York City and there's a million pedestrians that are by me, they all feel like NPCs because they're just a projection of what they are in their sandbox. And I'm seeing like a version of it, but it's not actually. It's not
unless you
actually,
start playing with it. Yeah, and maybe there's like a degree to it. Now, again, I know it sounds like super on the nose, overly simplistic. I get it. But that's what I was shown, and I don't know what to make of it aside from the fact that when I started thinking about it from that perspective, I said, okay, hold on. Well, let's pretend it doesn't mean that it can't be the case that they're just showing it to me for me to go through some kind of a transformation. Sure, whatever. But if I allowed myself at that point, which I never did before, but after I saw that so clearly, I said, okay, let's pretend that is in fact the case for a second. Can I make sense of it still? And then I think I could. And the thing that makes sense to me is, well, first of all, if reality is enclosed, so you have like a certain, you have the same amount of yin and yang, dark and light, right? So you have a certain distribution of the dark forces, the light forces, they balance each other out, they have to exist. We know that the dark forces exist, it's obvious, right? So in order for that to balance out in reality as a whole, everybody has to play by certain rules to get to that state of equilibrium. Otherwise, everybody that can will grab whatever they can and will go to their corner and stay there, and then you leave more darkness to be perpetuated like by itself in other places. So in order to the whole thing to balance out, if you're the being that watches everything from above, you somehow have to communicate all of that through the layers. So in the beginning was the word, right? So you basically create the perfect message that reverberates through all of existence in such a way that when there's a mind perceiving from their perspective of reality, no matter what it is, it would make sense to them. The word is so perfect that it would reach them in the way that they understand. And that's that inner voice, right? And then if you follow that word, you will reach that balance, that harmony, which will harmonize you with the other channels that are harmonizing altogether. And in that point, there's a new transformation that happens, and it elevates you to the next level and the next level and the next level. And that is designed this way because there's simply no other way for it to be arranged. And that, I guess that's what would be karma, because your actions basically kind of lead to the kinds of world lines you're going to be experiencing. So the thing that if you're the kind of person that cheats and steals and all of that as your regular operational, day to day, then what you're signaling to the system, that's what makes sense to you. That's the world you're going to be in. You're going to see everything in these terms. So you're going to end up in a place that you really don't want to be in. And you don't even realize it in the beginning, because in the beginning, it all looks like gains, gains, gains. So it's essentially, it's a diffuser that allows for the ultimate transformation for all the entire system. And in the end, what matters is that everybody kind of come to the same, to the same understanding. And I think that ultimately karma is something that, because individually we couldn't really carry ourselves, we didn't know how to behave in this way. The Jesus idea, the way that I'm kind of making sense of it, is that that God, that particular God in its infinite love, what he did, he instantiated himself in our world in physical form, and he took on himself the experience of ultimate suffering beyond anything that any human can ever imagine. He experienced it directly, because he can. And by doing so, he basically took the bill and paid it for everybody. He said, okay, I'm going to hold the bill. I'm going to make sure that you're taken care of until you figure it out, because otherwise you're all going to go to places you really don't want to be in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold that bill of your karma. The only tribute you have to pay me, because it's for the balance of things, it's not some kind of an ego thing, is that you have to acknowledge that this was done for you. That acknowledgement is sufficient to actually give you enough time to figure it out. But what I saw is that Jesus was basically ascending, so he was basically finished his contract now. We're ready as a civilization to enter a new stage in which we buy back the bill, and now we're going to carry the bill collectively. So we're not evolved enough to be as perfect as you need to be individually, but we can be collectively. We can keep each other in check. And if we can do that, Jesus can, the software of Jesus can be higher, and we get to actually carry the responsibility collectively. that's how me, Danny, making sense of what I saw. And so far, I kind of started talking to priests a little bit more, just to kind of understand more of what the actual ideas are versus what you hear other people say about it, right? And what's interesting, it does track a lot of the ideation that happens inside of Christianity. And why would it be one religion versus any other religion? Maybe because it's the most effective in the short period of time required to deliver it. I don't know. Like it's because it's not everybody would go and start doing meditation or psychedelics, but any Joe that just has a regular job and whatever can connect to the Jesus story. So that's enough to put them in the right channel to actually survive whatever is unfolding.
Yeah, it's just broad enough, or there's enough of a common denominator for I think it to affect the most amount of people. I think is probably yeah. That's really interesting. I went to 12 years of Catholic school. I don't really consider myself a Christian or a Catholic, but I've never heard that put that way before. That's really interesting, and it makes sense. When you say that Jesus is software, though, do you mean that? Obviously, that I always use the word think. We talked about language earlier and stuff, but do you believe? Maybe is a better way of saying this that the God from the Bible is just a layer up from where we are in terms of what I mean by that is in the No Man's Sky analogy. Are they the level up from where we are that created our civilization?
A few levels up.
A few levels up.
Quite a few, yeah. And above him, it seems. And again, at this point, I am actually pretty careful with how I speak.
Yeah.
But from what I saw, there are levels above him. So, again, the best. I understand that being on the receiving end of what I'm saying right now just sounds so like esoteric and like out there. But in for a penny, in for a pound, right? The best kind of rationale I have for this is that he is this loving being. He wants to represent us in a way that we're not going to go down paths just like his children. It's not that hard to kind of guess what's going to happen if we're going to keep doing certain things a certain way. From the perspective, so I think it's really coming from that. It kind of like, he's like, listen, let me represent you. Don't worry about the other thing. Let's take it slow, basically. I have to admit, it is the only thing ever, this thing that I've seen that gave me a certain kind of humility in that space that I've never had before. Because I was convinced, again, just like any liberal, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's for weak-minded people, they want like all that stuff, right? And I was like, oh, wait, dude, what if it's real? Like, it's like, it's like, okay, hold on for a second, because you don't want to be wrong about this.
No.
So I was like, okay. But from what I'm seeing is, as long as you don't need to live a perfect life. It doesn't matter if I think ultimately, whatever the truth ultimately is, it will obviously come to you because there's infinite goodness there. So whatever it is, as long as you live the ethical life in any shape or form, or you're doing your best, it will find you exactly how it needs to find you. It doesn't have to be Jesus. The right way to arrive at that path will definitely find you.